Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. Stop Sis is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to Stop Sis. Hey, my friends. Welcome back to another Stop Suffering in Silence episode. My name is Denise Walsh, and I'm here with my friend Rachel Timothy. And I'll do a quick disclaimer before we jump into the episode. As always, you know that we are going to be talking about some hard stuff. And so if that is triggering to you, then maybe this isn't the podcast for you at this time. But you know what? At the end of the day, all of us have been through hard stuff. And we want to create a platform where we can talk about that, but then also talk about the healing journey that comes after bringing darkness into light. Today, we are going to be talking about grooming, gaslighting, and answering the question, how the heck does stuff like this happen?
Yes.
And with that being said, Rachel, we're going to share a bit about your experience with grooming and gaslighting and living in a world that didn't make any sense for you. But we know that this can look a lot of different ways to a lot of different people. And so we'll be bringing in other examples as well. So, Rachel, people ask me this all of the time. If it's not like a kidnapping and someone being stolen, how does this happen, and often in plain sight? Tell us a bit about the grooming process.
Yeah, for me in particular, I believe that the grooming process started probably years before I even entered the scene. This particular man was a coach, he was a teacher, he was an elder, and he had done a really good job of making everybody believe he was a safe person. And so, he said the right things, he did the right things, he volunteered, and began the grooming process with the entire community prior to me even getting there. And so he had also, before I got there, groomed several other girls already. One of the interesting things I feel like is grooming is almost the same every time. Like there's a process of, you make the victim feel special. You give them special things. You talk to them about secrets. You basically emotionally manipulate them to where they have feelings for you, or maybe they make it to where you're emotionally attached to something to where you don't want to cause pain, basically. And so that grooming bond was created between me and my coach within a couple of weeks of me starting at a new school, my 4th grade year. So I was 9 years old. And what I thought was just, him being excited about me being a basketball player, him wanting to talk to me about sports and about getting better at basketball, like he made me feel special. He made me feel good. And I had no reason to believe that there was an underlying reason for all of it. And that's really what grooming is. You are preparing somebody's heart and mind for abuse, to where then when the abuse happens, their voice is taken away from them. They don't feel like they have the option of speaking up.
When I look up the definition of grooming, it says preparation to get somebody to do something. So it's instead of just going in full force and asking somebody to do the intended action, it's this warming up phase. So when we finally do ask or act in a way that would put somebody's red flags up,
Mhm.
there's this emotional, I want to say like emotional manipulation that has happened.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how long would you say the grooming process took for you?
I mean, it was probably about a 6-month process of just increasingly pulling me in deeper and deeper. The way that I like to describe it is similar to when you put a frog into boiling water, that frog is going to jump out. But if you put a frog into lukewarm, safe, comfortable water to start and slowly turn the heater up to where it eventually gets to a boil, the frog doesn't realize it's boiling until it's too late. And that's how it felt for me. I didn't see the red flags. I didn't see the problems until it was too late. And he was very, very good at then also casting on me shame and guilt and uh, fault for these things. And so I believe the grooming process does that for the victim as well.
So I just looked up the 6 stages of grooming, and it starts with targeting the victim. So basically choosing someone,
Okay.
gaining trust. And like you said, trust was gained because he connected with you on something you really enjoyed, which was basketball.
Correct. And his other victims, like there was one who he connected with her with art, like it completely different. He called me his little all-star. He called her his little artist. It had nothing to do with him. It had to do with how he could connect with her heart.
And so he got to know you before he even introduced himself to you.
Exactly. Yeah. So he knew all about my family. I think that's another part of when you pick your victim, you pick a family that is most likely going to be easily tricked. And Christians don't want to hear this, but honestly, we are one of the easiest tricked individuals because we want to show grace. We want to show trust. If somebody has the name Christian, we want to assume that they are good and trustworthy and would never hurt our children. And we let things go under the blanket of, oh, he's a Christian, it'll be okay.
And well, and I think, yeah, okay, we'll keep going. So the third phase is filling a need. And this can happen, you guys, certainly this is an adult-child relationship, and I think there's power dynamics that happen when it's adult grooming a child. But I also know of people who've been in domestic violence situations, or I know of one of my friends said her ex-boyfriend actually trafficked her. And so it wasn't an immediate, here, let's go, I'm going to sell you kind of a thing. It was a process. And so gaining trust, filling a need, and then isolating the child. And so filling the need could just be, I feel special, I feel loved, I get all of this attention, or, do you have any other ideas of what filling a need could mean?
Well, for some kids, it could be something like, even if they're a hungry child, they need food, or they need, let's say the perpetrator gives them shoes or clothes. I mean, foster care, kids in the foster care system have a tendency to be trafficked way, way, way too often as well. And so just a physical need could be met, as well as emotional and mental and all of that.
And with my friend that I know who was trafficked by her boyfriend, he would tell her the money's going to go back to your mom.
Yeah.
And so he coerced her into believing it was for good on some level because it was going to go back to her mom. And of course, that never happened.
Yeah. Yep.
And then isolating the child. Tell me about that.
Well, and every case is different. For me, I was a preacher's kid. And so there was a shame aspect of when he tricked me into letting him take pictures of me and started that child porn process, which obviously I didn't know that's what that was. But when it was done, I knew it was wrong and I felt dirty. But because of the secret that he had created, I didn't have anybody to talk to about it except him. I was told either my parents wouldn't believe me, or my parents would think it was my fault, all of these things. And as a child, you never see an adult get in trouble, you assume, yeah, I will be the one that gets to blame for this. And so the only person I had to talk to was him. And that was a very isolating feeling.
So secrets, keep a secret.
Mhm.
Did he, and he said you were going to be the one that got in trouble. Did he say that other people in your family would be hurt or make threats on that level?
I never experienced that. Oh, sorry, that was my dog. I never experienced that, but several of the girls that I was in a safe house with did. That was how theirs started. And all you need is that initial, all you need is that initial first time. And once they have that, you're stuck. And that's how it was. Like, there was no going back because it was so extreme. Something that you, especially as a kid, had never even thought of. Now all of a sudden was happening and you can't process it. You have nobody to talk to. All you needed was that initial time. That's all the perpetrator needed. And the rest was history because they had you at that point.
They had you. And you know that you weren't the only one, that each year it seemed that he picked a favorite student that he would isolate, that he would raise up to make feel special. And I know another story where a girl she ran away at 15 because of abuse in her home, and then was saved, of course, by this man who was going to now take care of her and make sure that she didn't get hurt by her family anymore. And, again, kind of making her feel special, touting her around town as like his new girlfriend. But apparently she found out that the word he was using actually meant my new prostitute. And so she ended up in the life for 20 years as a prostitute by this guy that ended up being what did they call it in that world? A John or a handler or a pimp. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so
it's not just the grooming process with like your heart and your emotions. There's a brainwashing that goes on too, because you begin to change how you view yourself, how you view the world. Like, I know for me, I began to have no self-worth, no value in myself. I really believed his words when he said, "This is what God made me for," because God wasn't stopping it from happening. So maybe this really is what I was meant for. But then it also changed my view of the world, because as a kid, I didn't understand that the whole community was groomed. I just knew everybody was allowing this to happen. And so my view of other people protecting me, or my view that maybe this really is okay because nobody was stopping it, it changes the way you think. And so it wasn't just my emotions, but also my brain as well.
And so one of the things that's, when you think of intermittent reinforcement is the strongest form of reinforcement. And so, for example, if you want your kids to unload the dishwasher randomly have it be their job every day or whatever, but then randomly give them $5. And that intermittent reinforcement is like, maybe this time I'll get it. And so they are, and that attention is kind of like intermittent reinforcement to somebody who has that emotional or enmeshed bond where like, I want that approval. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to get that approval. And if I don't get it, I did something wrong and I'm going to try even harder. And you're kind of on this.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So, well, I mean, I can tell you that my coach would be all about me at times. He would want to spend time with me. It seemed like every day, like it was all the time, but then all of a sudden, nothing. Wouldn't look at me, wouldn't act like I even existed. And this emotional roller coaster ride of, well, what did I do wrong? There was a point when I was probably 11. I didn't know what I had done wrong. And so I took all of the money that I had at home and I came and I gave it to my coach. And I said, here, like maybe now everything will be okay, because I had seen money exchanged for me before. And so, and he made fun of me and laughed at me and was like, what are you doing? You're going to get me in trouble type thing. everything was so confusing, and you just didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring. And so you were constantly on edge. But yeah, I literally remember bringing him money, hoping to make him happy. And you would think that this would be somebody I would want to run away from. I would want to tell on, but instead I was trying to please him. And I think that goes to show just how deep this went.
Tell us about Stockholm Syndrome. What does that mean and how does that relate?
My understanding of Stockholm Syndrome is that you do have feelings for the person who is hurting you. And I remember when I came forward as an adult, knowing that he was hurting other kids. And so that was the whole reason I was coming forward. But I remember feeling bad that I was going to hurt him. And a lot of people didn't understand that, but I did. Like I felt guilt. I felt like I was hurting him. I would have to tell myself, okay, he's not, because he had told me, he's a good guy. He just makes mistakes sometimes. And I don't know how to explain it, except I legit thought I loved him. I legit thought he loved me. And so it's like you remember the good things and not the bad.
Right. And Stockholm Syndrome was a term that came from like a hostage situation, right? And so by the end of the hostage situation, the police were trying to rescue these people who had been taken hostage by somebody with a gun and craziness and things. And by the end, they were defending the bad guy.
Yeah, from the outside looking in, you'd think that these people would be scared and running for their lives. I think it's a survival technique, honestly. I think it's your brain tries to normalize the crazy that's happening in your life so that you stay alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the last part after isolating and then abuse happens and then maintaining control. And I think that's an interesting phase of the grooming process because it tells me it's a bit about power and it's a bit about like, this is not just a one-time thing. This is something that happens over years. So what would you say your coach specifically did to kind of maintain that control over the relationship?
I think the roller coaster ride of sometimes liking me, sometimes not for no apparent reason would be part of it. He also would try to do things to make me jealous. And then I remember even as I got, let's say, so like the abuse with him pretty well stopped when I graduated 8th grade. And I went on to high school, but I would still see him occasionally out in public and he would still come up and make those triggering comments just to see if he still had a hold on me, I believe. And it would still work. To explain, and I've maybe already said this on here, but the brainwashing, I asked him to sing in my wedding. Like that goes to show just how extreme my head was with him. And so, yeah, I mean, I assume just those triggers, seeing if, because when the abuse started when I was 9 years old, the way that I understand it, and from your counseling degree, you know better than I do, I stopped for a while at 9 years old, emotionally, mentally, all of the things. And when I see him, I'm 9 years old, like emotionally, all of it. And so I think he would just check in anytime he'd see me, and that would be his way of knowing he still had me.
Yeah, you'd go 9. And whether that was just a look on your face or the way that you talked to him was different, whatever it was probably a sign to him like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, when I was in the counseling world, we would ask people when did abuse first start? When did you start drinking? When did you start smoking? Like all of that addiction stuff. And oftentimes over time, we recognized that when somebody started using, they stopped developing coping skills. And so, for example, if someone told me they started smoking cigarettes at age 12 and now they're 16, I would know that their emotional capacity was like that of a 12-year-old. And because whenever something hard happened, they went straight to that addiction instead of learning other coping skills. And so, yeah, it's fascinating how our brain and body work.
Mm-hmm.
But
One of the things with my book and coming out about my story, um, I explain the grooming process in my book. I explain how, I mean, the way that he drew me in, he made that connection, and then there was just no reaching out after that. But people made a connection, I think, with the grooming part more than anything, because so many people are groomed, and then the abuse maybe looks a little bit different for everybody. Not everybody is groomed and then trafficked, but majority of the time, what do they say? It's like 93% of abuse victims know the perpetrator. So that means grooming was done to keep them quiet. And so a lot of people would come up to me and say, until today, I really thought it was a relationship. Yeah, he was 40 and I was 12, but I just thought it was just as much me as it was him. And they had no idea it was actually abuse and not their fault. But that has been one of the biggest eye openers for people. And I think that lifts a burden off of them too, where they can put the correct word with what was done to them.
right, right. I think that's one of the trickiest parts about a lot of this is there's no words to describe it.
Yes.
There's and so when you can pinpoint like, oh, this was the process that happened. I heard of another story where a boy was being abused by his stepfather, and he would start saying, we are going to get in trouble. You say anything, we're going to get in trouble because of what we're doing. And again, it's just those sleight of words that like, well, I must be a part of this too.
Right.
There's stories of pastors with teens from their church. And again, they're using those words that make the victim in this sense feel like they must be an accomplice and they're going to get in trouble too.
Yes. And I think a lot of times the people put themselves in those positions of power to go along with the grooming process. It's not some bum off the street who's grooming you. It's somebody of power typically in that person's life, whether it's to a kid or to an adult. But when they then go up and stand behind the pulpit and preach about God, but that night before they were abusing you, there's no way you can come forward. At least that's how it feels.
Right. Right. And that's just another way of isolating you because you have no one to talk to and no one who you believe is going to believe you anyway. I'm sure they're saying that too. Nobody's going to believe you. You're going to, all those threats.
Yep.
One thing this reminds me of is emotional manipulation, because it feels like, and again, this might not be in 100% of your world, but there was a piece of you that when he was treating you with attention, even though there was abuse involved, you were on this high, like, oh, he likes me or whatever. And then when he wasn't, it was a low. And so there's just this roller coaster of emotions. And I know of someone recently who we can deem a gaslighting. You would bring up a situation that you were bothered by, and he would get mad at you and then stonewall for days, meaning not talk to you. I know that happens in domestic violence situations. That certainly happens in addiction situations, where you bring up a concern, and instead of actually talking about it, it's now turned back on you, and then you're the one who ends up having to apologize. So let's talk a little bit about gaslighting, which is that emotional manipulation. And when I look up the definition, which I think is hilarious because that's exactly what it does, is gaslighting is when you manipulate someone by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. And you said confusion. You lived in this world of confusion because in your heart of hearts, you knew it wasn't right, yet this was the life you were living. So tell me a little bit about gaslighting.
Yeah, I can remember the very first time I heard the word gaslighting. I was at an eating disorder facility back in 2017, and I was technically there for safety reasons at that point, but somebody brought up the word gaslighting, and I kind of let it go through one ear and out the other because I didn't know what it meant. And then they gave the definition. I was like, yep, I've lived that for sure. And I think that there's people who purposefully gaslight you, who are there to make you question. If you say the sky is blue and they say, no, it's black, and you begin to wonder, okay, am I colorblind? Like, what's wrong with me? And when they do it over and over and over again, you lose confidence in yourself. You feel like something's wrong with you. I also think there's people out there who don't realize they're doing it. I think a lot of times when victims or survivors come forward and they share their story, people will say, well, maybe you're twisting you think it went, or, maybe you're remembering this part wrong. And I don't think they're maybe meaning to, maybe it's too much for their brain to soak in at that time. But in a sense, you are gaslighting that survivor, because they're going to start wondering, okay, am I twisting this? Was it really just as much my fault as theirs? So, I mean, you really have to be careful when a survivor comes forward, how you respond, because it can really either reinforce what the abuser's already said or give the power back to the survivor.
Right. And I think of gaslighting, it's like, it is walking on eggshells. It is, you don't know if somebody is going to blow up or if they're going to be nice. You don't know how they're going to respond to what would be a normal conversation, but yet anything could maybe trigger them and they could go off and on whatever, whether it's aggression or storming out and stonewalling. But at the end of the day, what it reminds me of is like emotional, that EQ state, emotional quotient. Gaslighting to me is like, these people don't know how to handle good conversation or handle their own emotions. And so it seems extreme.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm just thinking of someone in a domestic violence situation, or somebody in who has anger management issues or that kind of thing, where you're walking on eggshells a lot. But did you feel, or the other one, I guess I'm thinking out loud here, is when you say, again, this doesn't feel right, and they say, oh no, it's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's gaslighting too. And I think that's where a lot of that confusion comes from, because you're like, do I believe these adults in my world that are telling me this, or do I believe myself, especially as a child, with these people in power and in a power and authority?
Right. Or they give you scriptures to back up what they're doing. I mean, yes, that is gaslighting to a T. A really interesting story that I was told actually by a police officer one time. Me and Granny were at a police station, and back from my old hometown, there was a lady that we called Scissors Lady. Okay. She was not right in her mind, would walk around town with scissors, just like chopping the air. And, as kids in high school and everything, you'd see her and be like, oh, Scissors Lady. Well, this officer explained to me she was married to a very, very wealthy man who belittled her day in and day out, isolated her to where she had nobody else to talk to, where you can't bounce circumstances off people. Like if you have other people in your corner, you could say, is this normal? And no, that's not normal. But when you're isolated, you believe the perpetrator because that's all you have. And day in and day out, he just belittled her a little bit more by a little bit more. And she literally is homeless on the street with scissors. I mean, because of that brainwashing and emotional abuse that she went through. But I think the big key also is that isolation. You can't get away with this if they have other people in their corner.
Right. Because then they do have somebody who says, no.
Mm-hmm.
That's not right. And so one of the things I've learned too over the years is that when this gaslighting is happening and you're kind of disconnected to your inner strength and to that still small voice, your intuition, and again, you're living in this cloud of confusion, is that you second guess everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so you again are like, is this right? Is this not right? I don't understand. They're saying it's right. I don't really believe it's right. And we've seen this not just with abuse, but with like it kind of can morph and impact other relationships too. Tell me a little bit about how like that second guessing has impacted your life or others.
Yeah, it has impacted in like my husband. Whenever he'll say something, I'll have, okay, does he actually mean this or this or that? Because you don't know. You're wondering. You feel like you have to read the room every time you walk in. You have to read everybody's emotions. You feel like you are in charge of keeping people happy. I think Brene Brown talks about that a lot in one of her books, is you feel like that's your job in order to stay safe. I know, like with Granny, she will explain something to me and I will perceive it completely differently in a completely unsafe, mean way, when in actuality, she didn't mean that at all. But that I have to wonder, because of what I went through with my coach. My brain goes through 101 different options of what they mean when they say something. And so it messes with your relationship. It messes with trusting people. You can't take people's word because you assume something else is what they mean. But probably one of the biggest things for me is it has messed with how I hear the Holy Spirit. Because when God whispers something to my heart, for years, I would second guess it and think, okay, no, maybe this is actually Satan, or is this? I just didn't know because of all of the brainwashing that I had gone through. But that was probably the saddest thing for me, is I didn't know what was God's voice and what wasn't. I second guessed everything.
Everything. Yep, everything. Okay, so you guys imagine living, walking on eggshells, living in a cloud of confusion, isolated, nobody to really talk to, second guessing yourself. And so you're putting trust into the people that are abusive, that are emotionally manipulating the situation. That really does shift the neural pathways in your brain. It makes new connections, new automatic thoughts, and it also shifts the chemicals that are being released in your body. And I know over the years you've termed it trauma brain. We often call what you experienced living in fight or flight mode, right? Living in survival mode. And when you're living in survival mode, you're shallow breathing, your blood goes from your brain to your limbs, you're tense, you're anxious, you're not sleeping, and maybe hypervigilant, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And instead of rest and digest, which is when you're more relaxed and you're deep breathing and all of that. And so when you live in fight or flight mode all of the time, that's going to create a different thought pattern than if you're in rest and digest. So we'll have a whole episode on trauma brain, but I'd love to hear a little bit about how you feel like living in this crisis mode for those developmental years impacted you on a physical level.
Well, I do think that it served me well. I think it made it to where I survived. And so it was needed for those years. And so for a long time, I hated the way that I felt, but yet I needed to look at it as, no, that's how I survived. So I'm not going to shame it. That is what I needed at that time. But now I no longer need it. It is not needed to keep me safe. I don't need to be in fight or flight 24/7. I remember going with my church family, like a group of us women. We went to this really neat Christian comedian, packed house, tons of people. Should have been a wonderful time. I was in fight or flight. I couldn't breathe. I was literally, whenever I get so caught up in my trauma brain, there will be times I will rub my skin off and I won't notice it. And so I had done that day. I had taken my finger over and over again and had not realized I'd taken my skin to where it was raw. But I made it miserable for everybody around me as well, because I was scared and I had nothing to be scared of there, but something triggered the fight or flight in me. And so it has impacted me to where, like, I have tremors at times. I still have flashbacks. I still get those major anxiety attacks. And all things that my body just got accustomed to living in. And now I have to remind myself, I don't need to go there right now. I am safe. But it's taken so many years and I still battle it. But at least now I know what it is and I have tools to help me through it.
Yeah. It's like your body immediately responds, even if it's not happening right now.
Yeah, your body keeps the score.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good book if you guys haven't read it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we have to calm our nervous system down. And again, it was helpful. It was helpful in that sense. And we'll talk again. We haven't even really mentioned dissociation yet, but that's certainly another topic that has kept you safe. where, and so and what's fascinating is that our brain and our body do this automatically. We don't tell it to do that. It
Right.
does what it needs to do to keep us safe in that moment. But sometimes then its knee-jerk reaction is to freak out or to immediately distrust or that kind of thing, put up those walls.
Mm-hmm.
And now years later, we're gonna, that's the goal of 90-day U-turn. That's the goal of you continuing to be on your own healing journey, is to calm those nervous system down and to retrain
Yes.
it so that it doesn't automatically go into freak out mode.
And I think for survivors out there who have maybe tried to reach out to somebody and they didn't give you the response that was helpful, if you haven't lived through this and you haven't studied it, you're not going to understand. It's difficult for people on the outside to understand why going to an amazing Christian comedian would cause such a freak out moment in me. But don't quit trying, because there's those like Denise who they do get it, they understand, and they can validate why you feel the way you feel and give you tools to move forward. When I first started coming forward about what I was feeling, what I was going through, what memories I was having, there was a lot of well-meaning people who would just say, oh yeah, you just got to get over it, just got to move on. Trauma doesn't just stay in that event, it impacts you the rest of your life. And so you have to change how you live and how you react to certain things. And it's very difficult to do alone. And so if you have tried to reach out and just felt ignorant, because I've been there, I felt like something was wrong with me. I'm obviously not a good Christian because I can't seem to get over the fact that I was hurt when I was young or whatever. Keep trying. Look in other places, because once you are validated for what you are actually feeling, it makes a big difference in your healing.
Well, and I have to say too, time doesn't heal. I
Right.
think sometimes people will say, oh, well, it happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I should be over it, or it should, and maybe other people will say that too. But time isn't the healer of all things, processing it and letting it. I mean, there's things that we need to do to get that stuck emotion out and
Yes.
to rebuild that foundation of trust. Because again, it's not a flip of the switch. There's reasons you didn't trust the world or yourself to begin with. And so putting that foundation back together does take time and effort. It's not just something time itself will heal. It does take that intention. But
Yeah.
I know even this past month, you have had a piece of that foundation put back together for you. Would you mind describing a bit of that?
Yeah. So we had a situation recently where trust was broken, and I was hurt by somebody that I trusted and thought cared about me. And whenever that happens, it feels like the world just disconnects for a while. All of a sudden, everybody's unsafe. The world is unsafe. Nothing makes sense. There's confusion. But this was one of the first times where I was able to tell what happened and somebody listened, they believed, and they took action. And I was amazed at how quickly it put that trust in humanity back together. And it was like I was able to function again and start the process of healing past the trauma that had been done. Whereas when people don't validate, it keeps that untrust there, and the whole world remains unsafe. And so as a kid, when people wouldn't believe me, I had to figure out a different way to function and live, because the world wasn't safe. Nobody had validated and confirmed what I had gone through. And so whenever there's that immediate reaction of listen, believe, and take action, it changes everything for the survivor. Healing starts happening automatically.
Well, and I love when we were talking about this before, you were like, when this is severed, when this foundation is severed, like I'm not okay. Like
Yeah.
I'm emotional. Again, I'm second guessing myself, second guessing everybody. Like this is a rocky foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as action was taken, and basically you were being told, oh my gosh, that's not acceptable, and we're not allowing that to happen again.
Yeah.
The foundation was put back. And I think, and then you were like, I can function now. I can do the things I know that are going to be helpful. I can take action and do my journaling, and I can do the helpful things because There's a little bit
Yeah,
of
I could
fibrillation.
breathe. It literally was like I could take a breath now because I was back in fight or flight mode. Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to explain myself. Nobody's gonna believe me. I'm gonna be unsafe again. And then the difference in just that one day, I was completely different come the next day. I felt safe again.
Yeah. And so that's just a great reminder that oftentimes our body and our thoughts are responding to this foundation.
Mhm.
And so we can change our thoughts and our behaviors. That's part of things we can control. But if we can do anything to help firm up that foundation, whether that be again and again, there's only so much we can control when we're in our world, but
Right.
whether it's choosing relationships that are different or, whatever we can do to firm that foundation, or what we can do as outsiders
Mhm.
to keep our trust strong, I mean, that's a big piece of how your body responds.
For sure. Yeah. I think another thing to keep an eye on too is sometimes I would be triggered or fight or flight mode would come into play, and I literally could not tell you why. And what I have learned from working with you in 90 Day U-Turn is our subconscious is taking in so much information. There could be, I mean, when you think of all that I went through as a kid and that I do remember, but the millions and millions of pieces that I don't remember, and then still in my everyday life, don't shame yourself for having a reaction to something that seems insignificant. Your subconscious is taking that stuff in, and it's your body's way of keeping you safe. And so don't shame it, just deal with it, use your toolbox, and hopefully work your way through it.
Yeah. Have you found, and again, triggers could be a whole other topic.
Yes, it's going to have to
um,
be discussed.
yeah, we'll keep going on that. But have you found that the more you use, as we say, the tools in the toolbox, or that more inner strength that you gain, the less you are being triggered?
Yes. So the word trigger can mean a lot of different things. And so just being emotionally triggered by a situation, I do feel more in control with that. Now, I do think there are purposeful triggers created by abusers. And that just kind of depends on the circumstance.
Right, right. Well, and I think something like going to the comedy show,
Mhm.
being in a big crowd, that caused lots of anxiety for
Mhm.
you. Um,
Yeah, a friend of mine recently, she went to like a carnival, I guess it was. She had
mhm.
two young kids. Her two kids wanted to go to a carnival, and so she took them. She had been trafficked as well as a kid. She goes to this carnival and anxiety, panic, freaks out, can't breathe. She's trying to be fun for her kids. She wants to be a good mom. Um, but panic overtakes her because of what she's been through. And she had posted about it in this one thing on Facebook, and people said, then why did you go? Why go to some? Why put yourself in that position? Why make your kids see you go through that panic or whatever? You can't stop living. Like you can't just avoid life, put walls up, and act like you're just going to stay in your box, because then you're keeping out the good and the bad. Like you still have to live and fight through those moments, but have safeguards in place, have people with you for sure to help you through those moments, those triggers that might come up.
I think one thing we often say is prepare for the worst, expect the best.
Hmm. Yes.
Where we don't want to go into a situation expecting something to go wrong. We want to go in expecting everything that can go right will go right, right? We want to have a view of the world that like this is going to be a great experience. In fact, we would imagine it being a great experience beforehand. We would imagine you feeling safe, like all of those things. Our body responds to our imagination. So we are going to practice and build up those neural pathways before you even go.
Yes.
And we're going to make sure that you have a buddy by your side.
Right.
And we're going to make sure if anybody weird comes up to you. And,
Mhm.
so I think that's a little bit of both. And we want to live, because we want her to be able to go to a carnival without panic. Right.
Right.
And so
Right.
we want to prepare for the worst, expect the best, and really,
Yep.
and the more you do it, hopefully, and using those skills, the more that someone could be less in panic. I don't know. What do you
Yes.
think?
Well, and I'm going to like completely jump ship and change topic for just a second, but I just remembered grooming through the online devices is just as much an issue that we need to
Yeah.
address as well, because our kids are being groomed online. Um, it can be a matter of hours or days, but it doesn't have to be a physical interaction.
Yeah.
Whole
No,
other
you're,
podcast.
yeah, I know. You're right. You're right. Because kids are innocent. They think everyone's their friend.
Yes.
And yeah. So what safeguards can you think of that would help somebody protect their child through electronics?
Well, goodness, I am somebody who is in panic mode when it comes to my kids and devices. And my daughter was communicating with a stranger not that long ago. Scared me to death. She was 8 years old when it happened. And I thought I had all the safeguards in place, but I wasn't checking her iPad um, daily by probably maybe once every few weeks. I would sit and kind of look through everything. I should have done it more, but there was one particular app that I agreed to it. It was a Barbie app. I thought they were just going to be playing pretend Barbies. Well, strangers could get on and play pretend with them. And a particular guy started asking my 8-year-old, if she wanted to do X-rated play, and could he be her husband, and that he loves her, but he's suicidal. So he needs her to, give him where she lives. And I mean, all these different things. And well, she didn't tell him where she lives. So he's like, well, I'm going to kill your baby in this game. Like, to an 8-year-old, that's a big deal. And once I figured all of that out, I screenshot it and I made a thing to the police because I was ticked. And it turns out this guy was overseas, probably will never get caught. It's moving on to the next little girl. But that grooming process started for her, and it went on for about a week before I realized what was going on.
Wow. Wow. So now we always want to end on a healing note. I
Okay,
think
sorry.
these are tough conversations, but it's honest, it's true. It's something that a lot of us have experienced, whether it's, gone all the way into trafficking or even just with an emotionally abusive boyfriend or whatever the case may be, or girlfriend. I mean, trauma knows no gender. But what did you, when you started unpacking this, because again, you lived in this cloud of confusion when, the clouds started to part and you started to see more clearly, what are some things that you did to start taking those steps out of the clouds and into a bit more clarity?
I think one of the best things for me was when I started reaching outside of myself. I started seeing other people experiencing similar things, wanting to talk about their trauma. I think anytime that you take a step out of your own trauma and help somebody else, it just gives you a better perspective of life in general. It gives you purpose for your pain. It allows God to work in them and in you. And it made it to where when I got up each morning, I wasn't just thinking about my own hurt. It's like, okay, there's a whole world of hurt out there. All right, God, how can we help today? What can I do today to help? And I think that um, it was impactful for me to step outside of myself, because trauma wants to keep you isolated. And whenever you start to help others, it helps you in return as well.
How did you start rewiring your brain so that way you didn't blame yourself or automatically go down into fight or flight mode? What are some things that you did to help unravel some of those lies?
I think when I started to speak things out loud, when I keep things stuck quiet in my head and replay it over and over again, it's like I go down a spiral. But when I speak something out loud to a trusted friend, and almost as soon as I say it, I can be like, oh, that's my old habit. That's my old thought process. Okay, how can I rethink this? How can I think this in a healthy way? I actually just did this with Granny yesterday. My brain went straight to black or white thinking. She wants me out of her life, or like, I mean, it's just where my brain went. And I was able to start to text it and say it out loud and recognize my old thought patterns, and then back up and be like, okay, so let's rethink this, pray about it. And then I was able to move forward and just feel so much better too.
So first I hear you saying you recognized your thought patterns. So at first you had, all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking, extreme thinking is not healthy, because typically it's often not true. We're never, if you find yourself saying never, always, all or nothing, usually that's a not true statement, right? Because it's very rarely all or nothing. It's we live in the gray area. And so recognizing when you're in this extreme thinking and then saying, all right, what's true? What do I really want? What are the facts? I know even in the emotional situation of the last few weeks, you were like, all right, well, what are the facts? That's where we need to stay, is the facts, not how I feel about the facts. And
yes.
But again, I think that that's a great reminder that we get to decide, not our thoughts, that we get to decide, not our emotions, that we may notice our thoughts and our emotions are responding in a way, but at the end of the day, we get to decide. And writing it down, speaking it out loud, processing it with somebody that you trust can help you say, all right, that's not true. Let's focus on what is true.
So you and I are doing this program with these survivors, and guys, I'm just got to tell you, it is seriously the neatest thing ever to see these women begin to get that spark back in their eyes. But one of the survivors was saying a few weeks ago, there's grace in the gray. And we were talking about the black or white thinking, and she's like, she had been doing some sort of art therapy, and she realized there's grace in that gray area. And it just reminded me of what you were saying there. Don't go black and white. Get yourself to that gray grace.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think at the end of the day, noticing it, and then you can finally do something about it. But if you don't recognize we're doing that, if you don't recognize you're living in survival mode, if you don't recognize that it's grooming behavior, if you don't recognize that you're being gaslit, all of that turns in on you. I must be doing something wrong.
And when you're in isolation, you need other people to be able to sometimes point that out to you.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, next week, you guys, we are going to talk a bit more about trauma brain, about how your subconscious works and how these neural pathways become automatic, and then how to switch them, because this is something that I think it's powerful information for us all to have. And the more you know, the more that you can take that control back, which means in my experience that you can sleep better at night. Because you're not rabbit hole down an anxiety trail, that you can go to concerts at some point, that you can take your kids to the pool, that you can live life, because this is just another powerful tool in that toolbox. So when it happens, because it will, life's going to throw us curveballs, all of us, but we'll be able to work through it on a much faster, because we have these tools.
Yes. And just know that you are not alone. You are never alone in this. This is way more common than we would like to think.
If you have any topics that you want us to talk about, put in the show notes or the description. The comments. Tell us somehow. If you're interested in being a granny, then certainly reach out to OpenBlindEyes at protonmail.com. All the links for everything will be in the show notes. And then if you're interested in sponsoring a survivor to be a part of our next round of 90-day U-turn and our retreats, then you can either sign up to be a survivor if you're interested in that. There's a waiting list option in the show notes below, but also you can sponsor a survivor. And we in the next month are creating our website with a, donate button and all that stuff, because we want people to be a part of this. But right now it's a GoFundMe. So just know that that's what it is. And over the next month, we'll be elevating everything. I'm going to end with an I declare. But Rachel, is there anything that you want to add about grooming, gaslighting, trauma brain that you think to end off with?
Just make sure you reiterate to yourself, it was not your fault. Grooming, gaslighting, none of it. They are mastermind manipulators, every one of them. And it's not your fault to be a victim to that, but now it's your choice to be a survivor.
Amen. Amen. Because my guess too is that you're not the only one that's tricked. And I think, say that again. It wasn't your choice to be a victim, but it's your choice to be a survivor. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Amen. Amen. All right. Well, here is my I declare to end our conversation. I declare I have the grace I need for today. I am full of power, strength, and determination. Nothing I face will be too much for me. I overcome every obstacle, outlast every challenge, and come through every difficulty better off than I was before. That is my declaration. And that is my declaration for you. Have an awesome day, my friends, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email OpenBlindEyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop Sis, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.